The great hall of the conclave stood silent as Ambassador Vethkai walked toward the human delegation, his forelegs clicking against the crystal floor with each careful step he took. He was tall and proud, his silver scales gleaming under the light of 1,000 floating orbs that drifted through the chamber like captured stars. And behind him stood representatives from 11 other species, each one ancient beyond human understanding, each one certain of their superiority over these newcomers who had crawled out of their little blue world barely 3 centuries ago. The humans looked so small in this massive space, their bodies soft and fragile, their eyes wide as they took in the grandeur around them. And Vethkai felt a wave of disgust wash over him as he studied these creatures who had spread across 200 worlds like a disease. "You breed too fast," he said, his translator device turning his hissing words into sounds the humans could understand. "You build warships when you should build temples to honor your betters. You expand when you should kneel and give thanks that we have allowed you to exist at all." The human ambassador, a woman named Elena Vasquez, stood her ground. Her face showed no fear, only a quiet kind of patience that Vethkai found deeply irritating. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. Vethkai smiled, or at least made the expression his species used to show amusement. "The Conclave of 12 has decided you're fake human. You will surrender 60% of your colonies immediately. You will dismantle your military ships and weapons. You will submit to population controls so that your kind stops spreading like vermin across our galaxy." A murmur went through the human delegation, but Elena raised her hand and silence fell. "And if we refuse, then we will wipe you from existence," Vethkai said simply. "Every man, woman, and child. Every colony and outpost. Every ship and station. We will burn it all until nothing remains but ash and memory. And even the memory will fade in time." He leaned closer, his hot breath washing over her face. "You are outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Our technology is millions of years ahead of yours. Your species is barely out of its caves. This is not a negotiation, human. This is mercy. Take it while it is offered." Elena looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. "We need time to consider your offer. You have 1 week," Vethkai replied. "Use it wisely." He turned and walked away, and the other conclave representatives followed him. And as they left, they laughed among themselves at the foolishness of these humans who thought they had any choice in the matter. 1 week later, the conclave gathered again to receive humanity's answer. The great leaders of 12 ancient civilizations sat in their floating thrones, arranged in a circle around a central platform where the human response would be displayed. Elder Admiral Kethmara, Supreme Commander of all conclave military forces, addressed the assembly with confidence. "These humans are predictable creatures. They will accept our terms because they have no other option. Their little war fleet could not scratch the paint on one of our dreadnoughts." The other leaders nodded in agreement. The Vorthax Hive Queen clicked her mandibles in amusement. The Krethvari Chancellor folded his 8 arms across his chest. The Sundari High Priest closed all 6 of his eyes in meditation. "Let us see what they have to say," spoke the oldest among them, a being so ancient that no one remembered what his species was once called. The communication screen flickered to life, and instead of Ambassador Vasquez, they saw a human male in military uniform. His face was hard and scarred, and his eyes held a coldness that made several of the conclave leaders shift uncomfortably in their seats. "This is General Marcus Stone of the United Earth Military Command," the human said. "We have received your ultimatum and we have considered it carefully." "And?" Vethkai demanded. The general smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Our answer is no. We will not surrender our colonies. We will not dismantle our ships. We will not let you control our children. We are a free people, and we will remain free or we will die trying. Keth Mara laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. Then you have chosen extinction, human. We will crush you within one rotation of the galactic calendar. Your war will be nothing but a footnote in history. Maybe, General Stone replied. But I promise you this, you will remember our names. You will remember what we did. And you will never, ever forget the price you paid for starting this war. The screen went dark, and for a moment there was silence in the great hall. Then the reports started coming in. 14 Conclave supply depots have been attacked simultaneously across 3 different sectors. Human strike teams had appeared from nowhere, destroyed everything, and vanished before any response could be organized. Thousands of Conclave soldiers were dead. Millions of tons of supplies were burning. The attacks had happened at the exact moment General Stone finished speaking. Keth Mara slammed his fist against his throne. How is this possible? How did they coordinate such an attack? No one had an answer. Lethkai felt something cold settle in his stomach as he watched the reports scroll across his screen. This was not how primitives were supposed to behave. They were supposed to cower and surrender. They were supposed to accept their place in the natural order. But these humans had done something unexpected. They had struck first. They had drawn blood. It does not matter, Keth Mara declared, rising from his throne. This changes nothing. We will mobilize our full military might, and we will exterminate them as planned. They have only delayed the inevitable. The other leaders voiced their agreement, their confidence restored by the Admiral's words. But deep in his hearts, Lethkai felt a tiny seed of doubt take root. Because the humans had looked at extinction and chosen war instead. They had heard the threat of total annihilation and responded with fire. What kind of species does that? He wondered. What kind of madness drives a people to fight when there is no hope of victory? He would learn the answer soon enough. They all would. The war began exactly as the Conclave had predicted, and in the first 6 months, humanity suffered losses that would have broken any other species in the galaxy. New Geneva was the first major colony to fall. The Zendari fleet arrived in orbit and demanded immediate surrender. When the colonial governor refused, they launched their glass bombs. These terrible weapons heated the atmosphere until the entire surface of the planet turned to molten glass. 8 million humans died in less than an hour, their screams broadcast across all frequencies as a warning to others. Kepler's hope fell next, and its fate was even worse. The Vorthax were a hive species that fed on the neural energy of other beings. They descended on the colony like locusts, capturing every man, woman, and child. And then they fed. Slowly, painfully, draining the life force from each victim over days while keeping them alive and conscious through the entire process. On Proxima 3, the cold and calculating Krethvari took a more scientific approach. They captured thousands of humans and brought them to their laboratory ships. There, they dissected their prisoners alive, studying human anatomy to find weaknesses. Every scream was recorded. Every death was documented. And the results were shared across the Conclave network so that other species could learn how to kill humans more efficiently. Colony after colony fell, and the human fleet was pushed back toward Earth. Their ships were outnumbered and outgunned. Their technology was primitive compared to weapons that had been refined over millions of years. And their people were dying by the billions. Admiral Keth Mara watched the reports from his command ship with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The humans were being crushed just as he had promised. Soon there would be nothing left of their pathetic species, but ashes and bad memories. But then came the reports from Proxima 7, and everything changed. Proxima 7 was a small mining colony with no strategic importance. The Conclave had sent 20,000 Vorthax shock troops to capture it, expecting the 300 human defenders to surrender immediately. After all, what could 300 soldiers do against such overwhelming odds? The answer shocked everyone who heard it. The humans did not surrender. They dug into the rocky terrain and they fought. They fought for 1 day, then 2, then 5, then 10. And still they kept fighting. The Vorthax commander sent wave after wave of his troops against the human positions, and wave after wave was cut down by desperate defenders who refused to give up. When the humans ran out of ammunition, they fixed bayonets and charged. When their bayonets broke, they picked up rocks and threw them. When they had no rocks left, they used their fists and their teeth. On the 19th day, the last human soldier fell. He was a young man named Private Thomas Chung, and he had been wounded 7 times during the battle. When the Vorthax finally overran his position, he grabbed the nearest enemy and bit through its throat, killing one last invader before his body finally gave out. The Vorthax had won, but they had lost 8,000 warriors to capture a worthless rock defended by 300 humans. And as the commander filed his report, his mandibles trembled with something that might have been confusion or might have been fear. Similar stories began to emerge from across the front lines. On every world, in every battle, humans fought with a ferocity that defied all logic and reason. When the cruiser Defiance was surrounded by 12 Sindari warships, its captain ordered his crew to abandon ship. Then he flew his crippled vessel directly into the largest enemy dreadnought, detonating his reactor core on impact. He killed himself and 40,000 Sindari in a single moment of spite. On the colony world of New Darwin, a group of farmers held off a Krethvari landing force for 3 weeks, using nothing but hunting rifles and homemade explosives. When they were finally captured, they triggered hidden charges that brought down the building they were hiding in, killing themselves and 200 of their captors. In the orbital stations above Mars, human engineers sabotaged their own reactors rather than let the facilities fall into enemy hands. They died screaming defiance as the explosions consumed them. The Conclave had studied human culture before the war. They had learned about human history. They knew about concepts like revenge and spite and fighting to the last man. But they had not truly understood what these words meant until now. A Krethvari scientist submitted a report to the High Command that caused great concern. He had analyzed human behavior patterns and come to a troubling conclusion. These creatures do not fight to win, he wrote. They fight to make us pay. They fight to hurt us. Even when they know they cannot survive, they keep fighting simply to cause us more pain. This is not rational behavior. This is something else. Something we do not have a word for. Admiral Kethmara dismissed the report as nonsense. The humans were losing, and that was all that mattered. Their irrational resistance would break eventually. All primitive species broke when faced with superior force. It was simply a matter of time. But Vethkai read the report with growing unease. He remembered the look in Ambassador Vasquez's eyes when he delivered the ultimatum. He remembered General Stone's promise that the Conclave would remember humanity's names. He began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. The war continued, and humanity kept losing. Earth itself was now under siege. The great cities of the human homeworld burned under orbital bombardment. And still the humans fought on. Captured prisoners were interrogated, and their answers disturbed the Conclave officers who questioned them. When asked why they kept fighting when there was no hope of victory, the humans gave the same answer again and again. Because we can hurt you. Because every one of you we kill is one more that will never threaten anyone else. Because when we die, we are going to take as many of you with us as we can. This was not how defeated species were supposed to behave. This was not how rational beings conducted warfare. This was something new and frightening. And deep in the bunkers beneath Earth, the leaders of humanity gathered to discuss their response. They had been fighting defensively until now. They had been trying to protect their people, but it was not working. They were dying anyway. It was time to try something different. It was time to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of when pushed to the edge of extinction. The Conclave thought they had seen human ferocity. They were wrong. They had only seen humans holding back. What came next would haunt the galaxy for 1,000 years. 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, in a bunker that had been built to survive the end of worlds, the surviving leaders of humanity gathered for a meeting that would change the course of galactic history. General Catherine Shaw stood at the head of the table, her left arm now a cybernetic replacement after she lost the original at the Battle of Titan. Her face was hard and tired, marked by 2 years of constant warfare, and her eyes held a darkness that had not been there before the war began. Around her sat the last admirals and generals of the human military, the surviving members of the United Earth Council, and the greatest scientists humanity had left. They were all that remained of human leadership. They were all that stood between their species and total extinction. "We are losing," Shaw said simply. Her voice was flat and cold. "Half our colonies are gone. 2/3 of our fleet has been destroyed. Earth is under siege. And our enemies show no sign of stopping until every last human is dead." No one argued with her. The facts were undeniable. "We have been fighting this war according to our own rules," Shaw continued. "We have followed the conventions we created for ourselves. We have held back our most terrible weapons because we believed there were lines that should never be crossed. But our enemies have shown us no such mercy." She pressed a button and images appeared on the screens around the room. Images of New Geneva reduced to glass. Images of humans being eaten alive by the Vortex. Images of men and women being dissected on Krethvari operating tables. The room fell silent as the horror washed over everyone present. "They wanted to see what humanity is capable of," Shaw said quietly. "I say we show them." She turned to the scientists in the room. "Dr. Chun, tell them about Project Prometheus." An elderly man stood up, his hands shaking slightly as he addressed the assembly. "Project Prometheus is a bioweapon program. We have developed customized viruses for each major conclave species. These weapons target specific genetic markers unique to each alien race. They spread through air, water, and physical contact. And they are 100% fatal to their intended targets while being completely harmless to humans." Murmurs of shock rippled through the room. "Dr. Yamamoto," Shaw said. "Project Orpheus." A young woman stood. "The Vortex are hive species connected through a telepathic network. We have developed a signal that can be transmitted through this network. It overloads their neural connections and drives them insane. One broadcast can affect billions of drones simultaneously." "Dr. Kowalski." "Project Fenrir." An exhausted-looking man rose to his feet. "Self-replicating nanite swarms. Once released, they consume any technology they encounter and use the raw materials to build more of themselves. They can strip a planet bare of all artificial structures within weeks. And they can be programmed to specifically target conclave manufacturing and military systems." The room was silent. These were not ordinary weapons. These were instruments of extinction. Tools that could wipe entire species from existence. "We have spent 2 years dying," Shaw said. "We have watched our children be slaughtered and our worlds burned. We have played by rules that our enemies do not recognize. That ends today." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every person present. "If we use these weapons, there is no going back. We will become something different. Something terrible. The humans who survive this war will not be the same species that started it. But we will survive. And that is all that matters now." The vote was unanimous. 3 days later, Project Prometheus was deployed against the Sindari homeworld. Sleeper agents who had infiltrated the planet released the virus into the atmosphere. Within hours, the first cases appeared. Within days, millions were infected. Within weeks, 40% of the entire Sundari population was dead. The Sundari High Command watched in horror as their people collapsed in the streets, bleeding from every opening in their bodies. Their greatest medical minds worked frantically to find a cure, but the virus mutated faster than they could adapt. It was perfect. It was unstoppable. And it had been created specifically to destroy them. News of the Sundari plague spread quickly through the conclave, and for the first time, the ancient species felt something they had not experienced in millions of years: real fear. But humanity was not finished. Project Orpheus was activated against the Vorthax. A single signal was broadcast through their telepathic network, and in an instant, billions of drones went mad. They turned on each other, on their queens, on everything around them. Hive ships became slaughterhouses as the creatures that had eaten human colonists alive now tore themselves apart. The Vorthax queens screamed into the void, begging for the signal to stop, but the humans had designed it to loop endlessly through the network. There was no off switch. There was no mercy. Project Fenrir was unleashed on the Krethvari manufacturing worlds. The nanite swarms descended like silver clouds, consuming everything in their path. Factories that had produced weapons for 1,000,000 years were stripped to nothing in hours. Shipyards that had built dreadnoughts were reduced to dust. And the swarms kept growing, kept spreading, kept eating. The Conclave had expected resistance. They had expected humans to fight hard before dying. But they had not expected this. This was not warfare. This was industrialized annihilation. This was genocide conducted with scientific precision. Admiral Kethmara received the reports in his command center and felt his certainty crumble. 3 of the most powerful species in the Conclave had been brought to their knees in a matter of weeks. Weapons that had taken millions of years to develop were being destroyed. Populations that had existed since before humans learned to make fire were dying. How? He whispered to himself. How did these primitives create such horrors? A junior officer answered him, though he had not expected a response. Sir, the human prisoners we interrogated told us something. They said that humans have always been afraid of themselves. They said that the weapons we are facing now are weapons that humans built to use against each other. Weapons they locked away because they were too terrible to ever deploy. But we gave them permission to open those locks. We gave them a reason to become what they always feared they could be. Kethmora stared at the officer, understanding dawning in his eyes. The Conclave had not started a war with a primitive species. They had awakened something ancient and terrible. Something that had been sleeping inside humanity since the beginning. Something that humans themselves had spent their entire history trying to contain. And now it was loose. And it was hungry. And it was coming for all of them. The war entered its 3rd year, and the galaxy had become a graveyard. Human fleets that had once fled in retreat now advanced across the stars like a wave of fire and death. They did not simply reclaim their lost colonies. They scoured every world that had been touched by the Conclave's cruelty. The soldiers called it the Carthaginian response, a name that confused the Conclave translators until they searched human historical records. What they found made their blood run cold. Carthage had been an ancient human city that was destroyed so completely that salt was poured into the earth, so nothing would ever grow there again. The humans were doing the same thing now, but on a galactic scale. Any world that had participated in atrocities against human civilians was marked for cleansing. Any species that had killed human children was targeted for extinction. Any enemy who had shown no mercy was shown none in return. Admiral Vethkai stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace. There were so many of them now. Where had they all come from? How had a species that was losing so badly 2 years ago built so many ships so quickly? The answer was simple but terrible. Humans had stopped caring about anything except the war. Every factory on Earth and every surviving colony had been converted to military production. Civilians worked 20-hour shifts building weapons. Children as young as 12 were trained to operate defense systems. Old men and women who should have been enjoying their final years were instead assembling missiles and loading ammunition. The human economy had ceased to exist. There was no entertainment, no luxury, no comfort. There was only the war. Everything else had been sacrificed on the altar of survival. And the results were devastating. Vethkai's fleet outnumbered the humans 5-1, but he felt no confidence as the enemy ships moved into attack formation. He had seen too many battles turn into disasters. He had watched too many confident admirals die screaming. The battle began, and immediately the humans did something insane. Instead of keeping their distance and trading fire like civilized beings, they charged directly into the heart of the conclave formation. Their ships were taking terrible damage, but they did not slow down. They did not try to evade. They simply kept coming. A human cruiser, its hull torn open and burning, rammed directly into Vethkai's escort destroyer. Both ships exploded in a ball of nuclear fire. And before Vethkai could process what had happened, 3 more human ships did the same thing to 3 more of his vessels. They were using their own ships as weapons. What are they doing? Vethkai screamed. This is madness. A human voice crackled over the communication channel. It was a pilot whose fighter had been crippled, its weapons destroyed, its engines failing. You wanted a war, the human said, his voice calm despite the flames surrounding him. You got one. Then he flew his dying craft directly into the bridge of a conclave carrier, killing himself and 4,000 enemy crew. Vethkai watched in horror as human pilots across the battle did the same thing. Wounded ships that should have retreated instead accelerated toward the nearest enemy. Dying crews that should have surrendered instead detonated their reactors. It was not a battle. It was a mutual slaughter. The conclave won the engagement, but they lost 3 times as many ships as the humans. And when Vethkai reviewed the tactical data afterward, he realized something terrifying. The humans considered this a victory. They had traded 1 ship for every 3 of his. And they were happy with that exchange, because humans could replace their ships faster than the conclave could. Because humans were willing to die in numbers that no other species would accept. Because humans had decided that victory meant hurting the enemy more than they got hurt, regardless of the cost. The war ground on, and the conclave began to crack. Ambassador Vethkai was captured when his flagship was disabled at the Battle of the Crimson Nebula. He had been the one who delivered the original ultimatum. He had been the voice of the conclave when they demanded humanity's surrender. The humans remembered this. They broadcast his execution across every conclave frequency, and they took their time with it. 4 days it lasted. 4 days of screaming and begging and pleading. And when it was finally over, General Shaw appeared on screen with his body behind her. We remember what you did to our people, she said. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle. We remember New Geneva. We remember Kepler's Hope. We remember every atrocity, every murder, every child that was taken from us. And we are going to make you pay for all of it. Not because it will bring them back. Not because it will undo what was done. But because you need to understand that there are consequences for what you did. You need to understand that some enemies should never be made. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was like ice. This is not justice. This is revenge. And we are just getting started. Admiral Kethmara, who had promised a quick victory, finally fell at the Battle of the Viridian Nebula. His fleet was surrounded by human ships, and rather than surrender, he ordered his remaining vessels to fight to the last. It was a mistake. The humans did not simply destroy his fleet. They systematically crippled each ship and boarded them one by one. They captured Kethmora on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by the bodies of his guards. "You said this war would last one rotation," a human marine said, as she pressed her weapon against his head. "It has been 3 years. Were you wrong, Admiral?" Kethmora looked at her, and for the first time in his long life, he felt true fear. Not fear of death, but fear of what these creatures had become. "What are you?" he whispered. The Marine smiled, but there was no joy in it. "We are humanity," she said. "We are what you made us. And we are never going to forget what you did. And we are never going to forgive." She pulled the trigger, and the Admiral who had promised to cleanse humanity from the galaxy died on the bridge of his own ship, surrounded by humans who had refused to be cleansed. The war was almost over, but the horror was not. Humanity had won, but they had paid a price that could never be calculated. They had become something that even they did not recognize, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The war ended not with a treaty signed in some grand hall, but with a surrender so complete and absolute that it echoed across every corner of the galaxy. The Conclave of 12 was no more. 5 of its member species had been rendered functionally extinct. The Sundari had lost so many to the plague that they could no longer maintain their civilization. The Vorthax hive mind had been shattered beyond repair. The Krethvari had been reduced to scattered survivors hiding in the ruins of their once great empire. The remaining 7 species gathered on a neutral station to offer their surrender, and General Catherine Shaw came to accept it. She walked into the chamber alone, her cybernetic arm gleaming under the artificial lights. She was older now, her hair gray and her face lined with exhaustion. But her eyes were the same as they had always been, hard and cold and unforgiving. The alien leaders prostrated themselves before her, pressing their bodies against the floor in the most extreme gesture of submission their cultures knew. They had prepared speeches of apology and offers of reparation. They had brought treasure and technology and promises of eternal servitude. Shaw listened to all of it in silence. When they were finished, she stood for a long moment, looking at the beings who had once threatened to wipe humanity from existence. They looked so small now, so broken, so afraid. "You offered us a choice 3 years ago," she said finally. "Surrender or extinction. We chose a third option. We chose to fight. And now here we are." She walked among them, her footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. "You killed 11 billion of my people. You burned our worlds and ate our children and dissected our prisoners for science. You thought we were weak because we were young. You thought we would break because we were soft. You were wrong." She stopped in front of the eldest surviving conclave leader, a being so ancient that his scales had turned white with age. "What do you have to say for yourself?" The old being looked up at her with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall for millions of years. "We made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice trembling. "We did not understand what you were. We thought you were just another primitive species, easy to control, easy to destroy. We did not know." "Didn't know what?" Shaw asked. "That you were monsters," the old being whispered. "That you were worse than anything we had ever faced. That you would burn yourselves to ash just to make sure we burned too. No sane species does that. No rational being chooses mutual destruction over survival. But you did, and that makes you more dangerous than anything the galaxy has ever seen." Shaw nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "We are monsters. You made us into monsters. And now you have to live with what you created." The surrender was accepted, and the terms were harsh beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. The surviving conclave species would pay reparations for the next 1,000 years. They would dismantle their military forces. They would submit to human inspection of their worlds. And they would never, ever threaten humanity again. But the physical terms of the surrender were nothing compared to the psychological damage that had been done. In the years that followed, humanity became the most feared species in the galaxy. Not because they conquered other worlds. Not because they demanded tribute or worship. But simply because everyone knew what they were capable of when pushed. Young species emerging into the galactic community were warned by their elders about the humans. They look weak, the elders would say. They are small and soft, and they die easily. But do not be fooled. They are the most dangerous beings in existence. They do not fight to win. They fight to hurt. And if you threaten them, they will destroy you even if it means destroying themselves. The Galactic Archive, which had recorded the history of countless civilizations over billions of years, created a new classification just for humanity. Apex threat, do not engage. Diplomats from other species approached human ambassadors with extreme caution, terrified of saying something that might be taken as an insult. Merchants who traded with human worlds did so with excessive politeness, afraid that a bad deal might provoke retaliation. Even the most powerful empires in the galaxy took care to avoid any action that might draw human attention. And on Earth, humanity tried to rebuild. The survivors looked at what they had become, and many of them wept. They had won the war, but they had lost something in the process. The innocent optimism that had driven them to the stars was gone. The belief that the universe was a place of wonder and discovery had been shattered. In its place was a cold understanding of what they were capable of when their backs were against the wall. General Shaw retired after the war and lived quietly on a small farm in what had once been France. She rarely spoke about what had happened. When asked how she felt about the victory, she would simply shake her head and walk away. But one day, a young journalist managed to interview her. He asked the question that everyone wanted answered. Was it worth it? Shaw thought about it for a long time before responding. We survived, she said finally. Our children will grow up free. They will never know what it was like to watch their worlds burn. They will never feel the fear we felt. And maybe that is worth the price we paid. Maybe being a monster is acceptable if it means your children get to be human. The journalist asked one more question. What would happen if another species ever threatened humanity again? Shaw looked at him with those cold, tired eyes. Then we will do what we did before, she said. We will become what we need to become. We will do what we need to do. And when it is over, we will win. Because that is what humanity does. We survive, no matter the cost, no matter the price. We survive. The journalist left, and Shaw went back to her garden. And across the galaxy, in the halls of power and the academies of learning and the temples of worship, the name of humanity was spoken in whispers. They were the species that had looked at extinction and chosen war. They were the species that had burned themselves to save themselves. They were the monsters that other monsters feared. And deep in the heart of every alien who heard the stories, a single truth took root. Some species should never be threatened. Some enemies should never be made. And some wars should never be started. Because humanity would finish them. No matter what it took, no matter who had to die. Humanity would always finish them